Tonight on Ukraine Today, the Russian-American peace plan. Who is behind a document that, in a very first draft, looked like an attempt to push Ukraine into surrender? Talks in Geneva. What did representatives of Ukraine, the United States and the EU agree on? And is there maybe a chance for a just peace? Fighting for Pokrovsk, what is happening on one of the hottest parts of the front line. The war economy. In Russia, money for new military contracts is running out fast, and it's already affecting the occupiers' army. All that and more right now. Hi there, I'm Volodymyr Robchun, and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's jump into the news. We'll start with the battlefield and the latest Russian attacks, and right after that, we'll switch to the peace plan and the Geneva meeting between Ukraine, the US, and the EU. There's, well, a lot going on. So, over the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,190 troops killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,166,450 Russian invaders. On top of that, in the past day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 5 armored combat vehicles, 41 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. More on what's happening on the front line and around it in our story.
In the past 24 hours, 3 platoons have been eliminated and more than a platoon have been wounded. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine shared details about the fighting for Pokrovsk. According to them, defense forces destroyed exactly 60 Russian assault troops who, under the cover of fog, tried to advance toward the city center and gain a foothold. Another 23 people were wounded. As a result, the occupiers' attempt to break through failed. At the same time, the enemy is still holding the old positions they took several days ago. According to the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command, the enemy is now conducting search and assault operations, and the entire city effectively remains a gray zone.
The enemy who entered through the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk has already established a certain foothold there. This new foothold is already being supplied logistically. Accordingly, the gray zone is very large, probably most of the city today. Although the lines on the northern outskirts of the city in the northern part of Pokrovsk are currently being held in particular by our paratroopers.
Another direction that regularly appears in military reports is the Kupiansk area. Despite Gerasimov's report about encircling around 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers there, our command denies this information, on the contrary, reporting successes and advances by the defense forces.
Today it has not yet been possible to push the enemy out of Kupiansk itself. However, the counter-attacking actions that the defense forces are demonstrating today are a gradual advance. These are not any sudden counter-offensive operations, but specifically counter-attacking actions. Nevertheless, they are resulting in our defense forces managing to reclaim some tactical positions that were lost there several weeks, several months ago, but specifically within the city of Kupiansk itself.
The Russians have also become more active in the south of our country. The Zaporizhzhia direction, from where the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was drawing reserves to Pokrovsk, had been bringing rather alarming reports for several weeks. However, the situation has now been stabilized.
The active offensive that, as they claim, took place a week ago is no longer happening. Now we are carrying out strikes and using firepower against their reserves. And what is especially important is that now they have started to destroy the railway that supplies these groups.
The situation in Zaporizhzhia, analysts say, remains difficult. The enemy continues to concentrate forces and, using sabotage groups, is infiltrating villages under Ukrainian control along the bottom of the Kakhovka reservoir. However, these attacks keep failing time and again.
The Russians once again failed to take Stepnohursk, or even the multi-story buildings in the southern part of the settlement. Only part of the buildings are under enemy control. Additional pressure on Stepnohursk comes from enemy attempts to break through on the road to Hrihorivka. North of Primorsky Dachi, there is a large open area, so the Russians do not try to gain a foothold there. Instead, taking risks, they move further north, where there are buildings and some trench line.
But as the enemy advances in open fields, our artillery inflicts colossal losses on them, which is why the occupiers are no longer given vehicles and are sent into the assault exclusively on foot.
Close! That was close!
At the same time, the defense forces managed to strike not only along the front line, but also deep in the Russian rear. In particular, the past day was marked by an unprecedented event. Special Operations Forces shot down a Russian Mi-8 military helicopter with a long-range drone directly over Russian territory. As noted by the agency, this opens a new chapter in the war, offering the Ukrainian armed forces capabilities never seen before.
The fact is that previously, Ukrainians shot down helicopters in the air using regular FPV drones with a maximum range of just a few dozen kilometers and warheads weighing about 1.5 kilograms. In this case, however, we see that it was not necessary to ram the drone into the helicopter thanks to the powerful warhead. But on the other hand, as you can see, this is happening at a different altitude, one that regular FPV drones might not be able to reach. And what's very important, according to some sources, though this still needs to be clarified, is that this is happening at a very long distance. That is, in this case, it's the Rostov region, near the area of Kutenikovo. And what is Kutenikovo? Well, basically, it's 200 kilometers from the line of contact.
The occupied territories were hit as well. Part of the Donetsk region was plunged into a total blackout, which partially paralyzed the command of Russian forces. Among more than a dozen successful strikes, the explosions in Dokuchevsk are particularly worth noting. Analysts are still debating whether the nighttime glow was the result of a strike on a power plant or an ammunition depot.
Whatever it was, either way, it's ultimately a blow to logistics. Because if a substation is destroyed, the group loses electricity. If the strike hits the ammunition depot, then the group loses shells, which is crucial for the forces currently advancing in Donetsk region. In other words, at the very least, it slows down their offensive potential.
At the same time, fighters on the ground are confirming this information. In particular, due to intensified strikes on Russian logistics in the Donetsk region, assault units have lost their steady supply of reserves and weapons and have lost momentum in their advance in Pokrovsk as well.
Ukraine's air defense shot down 125 out of 162 drones Russia launched overnight on the north, south and east of the country. There were hits from 37 strike drones across 15 locations. Sadly, people were killed. 3 apartment buildings in Kharkiv were destroyed in a massive drone attack. The occupiers killed at least 4 people and wounded 13. An energy substation and the district heating network were also damaged. Large fires broke out near the border of the Chernihiv region following another Russian strike. There were hits on a residential building and on a firefighter's facility. Geneva. Delegations from Ukraine, the United States and the European Union held meetings on the peace plan to end Russia's war against Ukraine. The sides discussed key issues, offered their proposals, took breaks to coordinate positions and then returned to the negotiation table.
The negotiations in Geneva regarding Trump's peace plan are of critical importance. Representatives from the United States, Ukraine, and national security advisors from France, the United Kingdom, and Germany participated in these talks on the American proposal for ending the war in Ukraine.
Ukraine is approaching this process with a clear understanding of its own interests. This is another stage in the dialogue that has been ongoing in recent days and is primarily aimed at coordinating a shared vision for the next steps. At the
meeting, Trump's aides, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived.
The meeting was the most productive and substantive of all those held so far. In the
Ukrainian president's office, they are ready to work as quickly as possible to achieve real peace.
Ukraine never wanted this war and will do everything to end it with an honorable peace. Ukraine will never be an obstacle to peace. And representatives of the Ukrainian state will defend the just interests of the Ukrainian people and the foundations of European security. We are grateful for the willingness of our European partners to help.
Ukraine's allies are seeking to rewrite Trump's proposal, which they believe would benefit Russia. They disagree with at least 4 points.
We firmly adhere to the principle that borders should not be changed by force. We are also concerned about the proposed restrictions on Ukraine's armed forces, which would leave Ukraine vulnerable to future attacks. This is tantamount to military castration and leaves Ukraine perpetually vulnerable to a third invasion.
European leaders agreed to use the draft as a basis and expressed their willingness to work on it together.
We have very good progress, and we are moving toward a just and lasting peace. Ukrainians deserve peace more than anyone else on this planet. We believe that our great friend, the United States, especially President Trump and his team, will endorse this peace.
Keith Kellogg is confident that Trump will be able to end this war.
The foundation of the agreement has already been established. We are almost on the home stretch toward ending the war. There are aspects of the plan that should be spelled out and explained more clearly. There will also be security guarantees, with the United States as the main guarantor in order to avoid the mistakes of the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk agreements.
Right now, the media are reporting that Trump has appointed Driscoll, a friend and former classmate of Vice President J.D. Vance, as his new special representative. It is quite possible that he will work in parallel with Keith Kellogg, who may leave the administration in January. Washington continues to insist on advancing its 28-point plan. According to the plan, Ukraine must make territorial concessions to Russia and reduce its army. The US and Europe pledged to finance the reconstruction of Ukraine. Sanctions on the Russian Federation are being lifted gradually, and Moscow and Washington sign an agreement on long-term economic cooperation.
This is not our recommendation. This is not our peace plan. This is a proposal that was received. And as mediators, we agreed to share it. And we did not make it public. It leaked. It was not made public by our members or our representatives.
Donald Trump believes that Ukraine may decide to sign the peace plan on November 27th before Thanksgiving. But when meeting with journalists, he indicated that his peace plan is far from a final proposal.
No, it is far from final. We would like to achieve peace. This should have happened a long time ago. The war between Ukraine and Russia should never have happened. If I had been president, this would never have happened. We are trying to end it. One way or another, we have to end it. On
Friday, Zelensky addressed the Ukrainian people, stating that Ukraine now faces a difficult choice and risks either losing its dignity or its key partner.
This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. Right now, the pressure on Ukraine is among the heaviest it has ever been. Now, Ukraine may be faced with a very difficult choice, either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner.
Sources close to the Kremlin say that the provisions of this document should be seen more as a basis for a future agreement rather than as an agreement that Putin will officially sign.
If Kyiv does not want to discuss President Trump's proposal and refuses it, then both they and the European warmongers must understand that the events that took place in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated, and on other key sections of the front as well. Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but inevitably this will keep happening. And overall, we are fine with that.
Moscow objects to the proposed security guarantees for Ukraine, the size of its army, and the use of frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. We have this text.
We have this text. We received it through the existing channels of communication with the American administration. I believe that it could also serve as a basis for a final peaceful settlement.
The Kremlin is creating informational conditions to reject the agreement, since Russia is not interested in making territorial concessions, according to the American Institute for the Study of War.
A Russian victory is not inevitable. Ukraine and the West can exploit several key Russian weaknesses to force the Kremlin to negotiate and make real concessions.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin is facing growing problems with material and human resources, which will continue to complicate Moscow's ability to sustain the war as it drags on. That is why the Russian Federation is very interested in forcing Ukraine to surrender critically important territories that the Russian military is unlikely to be able to capture. That is why Gerasimov, when reporting the situation at the front to Putin, continues to exaggerate successes, and Putin plays along in order to force Ukraine and the West to accept Russia's demands in negotiations.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And now is a perfect moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. According to Ukraine's president, there are signals that the American side is hearing its Ukrainian partners. Diplomatic work continues.
Many things are changing. And we are working very carefully on the steps needed to end this war. Today, the talks in Switzerland will continue. Actually, until late at night, our teams will keep working, and we expect more reports from them. It is important that we have a conversation with the American representatives, and there are signals that President Trump's team hears us. I also spoke today with President of France, Emmanuel Macron, with the Prime Ministers of Canada, Croatia, Luxembourg, and I just spoke with the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz. I thank all of them. There are many more messages. Everyone is supportive, giving advice and sharing information. I want to thank each and everyone who is providing this help for us and for all of Ukraine.
The Geneva talks received high praise from the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He called the first day of meetings the most productive in a very long time.
I think today was worthwhile. It was it is probably the most productive day we have had on this issue. Maybe in the entirety of our engagement, but certainly in a very long time.
Rubio also commented on a Telegraph publication claiming that European countries had prepared their own 24-point plan to end the war. Rubio said he knew nothing about it. It would indeed be strange if Rubio announced that in the middle of negotiations aimed at improving the existing American plan, yet another document suddenly appeared and also had to be discussed and taken into account. So this alternative plan most likely does not exist, but a clear European position definitely does. The European Commission has outlined 3 key principles that must form the basis of any future peace agreement. This was stated by EC President Ursula von der Leyen. First, Ukraine's borders must remain unchanged because changing them by force violates international law. Second, Ukraine cannot be subjected to military restrictions. This would weaken its defense and put the whole of Europe at risk. Third, the European Union must play a central role in guaranteeing peace and future security arrangements for Ukraine. The German Chancellor and other G7 members, except the United States, also reacted to one more point of the American plan: returning Russia to the group. According to Deutsche Welle, 6 current members of the G7 are against this step. The only side supporting the return of the terrorist state is the United States. And if you are still wondering who actually drafted the plan that in its first version looked like an attempt to force Ukraine into surrender, Bloomberg may have the answer. According to the agency, the document was developed by Special Envoy Witkov, Trump's son-in-law Kushner, and Russia's representative Dmitriev. Bloomberg adds that the US president and key administration officials did not know the plan was being drafted. I immediately had one question. If Trump really received this document at the very last moment, then on what basis did he approve it so easily? Either it's the principle of I'll sign it and we'll keep working on it anyway, or the US president already knew the main points of this plan and was fully satisfied with them. And finally, the money, or rather, how money in Russia's regions are running out fast for financing new contract soldiers for the occupier's army. How does this affect the situation on the battlefield? More in our story.
Putin's special military operation is winding down. Russian regions are running out of money to pay contract soldiers. Officials from several Russian regions are reporting the cancellation of payments of 1.1 million rubles, allegedly due to a difficult budget situation. The first to stop luring potential contract soldiers with big payouts in 2025 was the Zabaikalsky Krai. Next, Khakassia also announced that there is no money. But hang in there. Now it's Yakutia's turn.
Yakutia has run out of money for military payments. The budget can't cope, said the Republic's finance minister Ivan Alexeyev.
The problem with delayed payments beyond Baikal is so massive that after opposition channels in Russia reported it, even Kremlin-backed media were forced to pick up the story. The widespread public outcry forced even Russian officials to acknowledge the problem.
The men are extremely outraged that after signing a contract and going off to defend the motherland, they have to wait months for the so-called relocation payments from the region. I won't read out everything they wrote to me because there are hardly any words that aren't profane, and I understand their emotions. I'll just quote the last sentence. It's both appropriate and gets to the heart of the matter. Please tell them over there that the officials' response, the budget is tight, we have no money, just wait, does not satisfy us.
It's especially hard to be patient in such a situation for the occupiers who are already dead. Because of the refusal to pay the promised compensation to their families, the latter can't even be buried properly.
When Cargo 200 arrives, the family members receive 100,000 from the region plus 1,100,000. This money was enough to arrange a decent funeral for their father, brother, or husband. Today, the most they get is like 100,000, and that's only if they show up on time. They have nothing to bury them with.
And it will only get worse from here, economists are now warning. The Russian treasury is empty. Because of Western sanctions, the freezing of Kremlin assets, and the widespread rejection of Putin's bloody energy resources, Russia has nothing to pay its own soldiers with.
In other words, the Russian economy has entered a downward spiral of contraction, already quite active, noticeable and undeniable. And it's unlikely that it will be able to get out of this tailspin easily. It's not even clear if it can get out at all.
Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but it seems that Western and American sanctions have indeed broken the back of the Russian economy. In its plans and budgets for 2025, the Kremlin has clearly set its expectations too high.
It relies on different oil prices, on a different dollar exchange rate, which currently does not exist.
As a result, there is no money to pay each new soldier 2.5 million rubles for a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. The same goes for payments for injuries and deaths of servicemen. Everyone who went to war to make some money will now only earn themselves a one-way ticket.
Stagnation has been going on since around September 2022. That is, since September 2022, you could say, for almost a year and a half, the Russian economy, even more than a year and a half actually, basically the Russian economy has not been growing. How long has it been exactly? Since September, so accordingly we're already approaching a year and a half, so the economy isn't growing, and moreover it's declining, and it continues and is getting worse. Moreover, the financial situation of companies is deteriorating. They are losing profits, and as a result, corporate tax payments are decreasing. Because of this, regional budgets are already in serious trouble.
To at least somehow reassure the families of Russian contract soldiers and grieving widows, Kremlin officials have verbally promised to resolve the issue as soon as possible.
It seems that the Republic's government has already found a solution. The minister promised to resume the payments.
However, all of this is just empty words. After all, there is simply nowhere to get that much money to support Putin's campaign. For now, the gaps are being patched using budgets for healthcare, utilities and education. But even all of these together won't cover even a third of the expenses for the special military operation. Meanwhile, Russian military correspondents are already loudly reporting widespread discontent among Kremlin contract soldiers. None of them are eager to die for an idea rather than for money. And on some sections of the front, Z correspondents admit after the news about the Kremlin stopping payments, cases of unauthorized leave and desertion have sharply increased.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.